So on behalf of the Peabody Museum, the Mesoamerican Archive, and the nonprofit organization Cruce de Caminos, it's a real pleasure to see all of you here this evening for this special presentation that not only will involve lecture and talk, but also music and sound. I've known, worked with, and admired Professor Jose Cuellar for over 40 years. We started out together as young professors at the University of Colorado, and I learned a great deal about his creativity, both as his friend and colleague. Professor Cuellar grew up in the Mexican-American barrio of San Antonio, Texas, where he not only imbibed the struggles and the identities of Mexican-American people, but also the musical practices and sounds of the street. From a very early age, he not only showed musical talent and ability, but also a very keen intelligence that led him to thrive in school. He developed both of these sides of his personality, the intellectual side and the musical side. He eventually became a musician with a career in Las Vegas, but also a PhD in anthropology from UCLA. While he was at UCLA, he began to show an interest in gerontology, and not only studied minority elderly in California and the way in which resources were not coming their way, but he also became very involved in understanding and supporting youth cultures along the Mexican-American borderlands. It is there, in fact, in the work with Mexican-American youth in the borderlands and Mexican youth, that he was given the name, the other name besides Jose Cuellar, that he lives by today, and that is Dr. Loco. He was, after he began his academic career and put aside his music for a while, he taught at Stanford University, where he created a band made up of other graduate students, teachers in the community, that became known as Dr. Loco's Original Corrido Boogie Band. This band made a splash, not only at the university, but beyond, and it evolved into Dr. Loco's Rockin' Jalapeno Band, which produced a number of albums and also became one of the more creative, cutting-edge Latino bands in the Southwest. This combination of anthropology and music is really what we're going to benefit by a great deal tonight. He's taught at a number of universities in this country and is very dedicated to finding ways that the university can serve the communities around them rather than just have the communities serve the universities. Today he gave a lecture in our class, Latinos Remaking America, in which he presented this model, this Chicano studies critical model of education. And some of that is reflected in what we're going to hear here tonight. Let me tell you a little bit of the story of how we got to this incredible moment tonight, where you have not only these instruments on the stage, but the person who can explain them to you and play them. Wherever I've gone, I've always brought Professor Cuellar to my university so he can talk and make presentations. And he was here at the Harvard Divinity School about 6 years ago, giving an evening presentation that was both talk and music, and he played a number of flutes. My good colleague, Barbara Fash, and Bill Fash were in the audience, and listening to him, they got this idea that over here in the Peabody Museum, they had this marvelous collection of ocarinas, but nobody to play them, nobody to study them, see what could be done with these. And so Professor Cuellar, on the basis of that experience, was invited to the Peabody Museum to be the Hertie Fellow. He came here and he spent a number of months, and perhaps he'll tell us what he discovered and what happened here in the Peabody Museum during that time that led to not only this incredible exhibit that's upstairs, but to this evening's lecture. During the process of us putting together this evening's event and that exhibition, we're very fortunate that a colleague from the Harvard Divinity School who wants to remain anonymous came over here and listened to the exhibition and realized that a better sound system could be created here. And through an anonymous gift called the Gift of Sacred Sound, very soon up on the third floor, when you go up there, you're not just going to hear sound, you're going to hear surround sound that has been put in by people who've taken what Professor Cuellar has created, and it's going to make it not only something you'll feel in your ears, but something you'll feel in your bones. And so this is part of what leads up to this wonderful evening with Professor Cuellar, who also, by the way, has written what I consider to be the most significant essay ever written on Mexican-American youth and experience called Chicanismo, that appeared in the Oxford Encyclopedia of Mesoamerican Cultures. There's so much to be said about him, but let him say and play for you what he knows so well to do. I do want to thank not only Jane Pickering for her support, Diana Munn, and also Charlene Higby. All of these people have been instrumental in helping us get to this moment tonight. So please welcome Professor Jose Cuellar, also known as Dr. Loco of the Rocking Jalapeno Band.
Thank you so much for coming. I wasn't quite sure what to expect or how many folks would expect such a beautiful evening, so I really appreciate you taking time out to join us for this presentation. I want to underscore David's thanks, but I'd like to generalize it now and begin by thanking the directions. Within the Americas, North, Central, and South America, Native Americans tend to recognize the directions and the energies that come from these directions. And today, being March 31st, where we in the Chicano community, in the farm worker communities, celebrate the birth and legacy of Cesar Estrada Chavez, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the directions and thank the energies from the directions as they represent, for me, what Cesar Chavez has inspired in my experience and in my life. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you and to thank Cesar, to thank the organizers, to thank the folks in the museum, everyone who has made this possible. And I'd like to start by playing. These are whistle flutes that are postmodern, they're contemporary. This one is made from porcelain, but in the form of the traditional eagle bone flute. So I'd like to direct our attention to the east, to the direction of the dawn, the direction of inspiration, the direction of illumination, okay, so in the Native American tradition, communities, when we say ho, you respond, you just go ho with a good energy. Okay, so ho! Ho! Oh, thank you so much. And now to the west. The west, direction of darkness, dusk. And for us, it represents faith, the trust, the energies that come to us from warriors who have died in battle, from women who have died in childbirth. I think of Cesar Chavez as having died in battle. And so for him, and for all of the women who have died in battle as well, for all of our wounded warriors, I'd like to play an inspiration on this buffalo horn ocarina that was made for me by a fellow Texan named Keith Golka. Now to the south, the direction of fertility, the direction of youth, noon, summer. Let's see, which instrument should I play for the south? I think I'll play this jaguar head ocarina that was made for me by Oaxacan Nash Tevar. To the north, direction of death, direction of the ancestors. And I'm going to use this ocarina, the one whole ocarina, it's called the death whistle. And in Oaxaca and other sites are used to call the dead during the Days of the Dead. So just to get a sense, I'm going to call the dead, and then I'm going to play this deer bone flute made for me by Scott Kennedy of the Carolinas. He made this one for me in December. Dear Virgil Elizondo, who just is making this transition into the spirit world. Reviving the ancient sounds of Mesoamerican ocarinas. After our introduction, I'd like to do an overview of the fellowship project, today's presentation, and then I'll play the ocarinas live. But first, I wanted to give you a sense of how my approach and the issues that I had to face in addressing this project. Dr. Quilter said, I'm a musician and an ethnologist, but I had primarily worked in Chicano studies. When I came to the academy, I came to be a Chicano scholar, to be a Chicano anthropologist, and to address Chicano issues. Toward that end, for many years, I said, I don't do Aztecs. I don't do Mayas. I do live cultures and I do problem-centric research that deals with issues in our community. Toward that end, when I came to the academy in the late 60s, Professor Carrasco mentioned, is this working or not working? No, it's not great. Oh, it's down below. Okay, I see it. Is that better? Oh, okay, cool. Oh! I was over here because, you know, in Native American trip, we always have a raffle. So when I saw the list over there, I said, is that the list for the raffle? So, When I came to the academy in the 60s, Professor Carrasco mentioned, I really did not come to become an anthropologist. I came to the academy because I was discharged in 1964. I went to Las Vegas within months. My major goal in life was to go to Las Vegas and play in Las Vegas, somewhere near Louis Prima. That was my objective. Within 3 months, I was there. By December, we were in Las Vegas, and we stayed there 2 years. I came back, we finished our contracts, came back to Orange County, where I started playing, recording, doing nightclubs, and doing recording sessions, working my way up the recording ladder. Finally, I got called for a Gold Star Studio, a Motown session. I show up, they give me my music. I'm looking at the music, and they say, okay, let's get ready here. Sax, you got the intro. And I'm still looking. Because I had recording sessions I had done were sessions where we talked about it a little bit before and this time it was a big orchestra and there was no talking. They said, you got it. And so when I flubbed it, he says, okay, here we go again. You got the intro, tenor. Again, this time I don't know what I played. I couldn't even see the notes anymore. And I didn't even get a third time. He said, that's it. Call the union and have them send a player that knows how to read. Thanks, we don't need you anymore. I had to pack up in front of the whole orchestra, drag my horn out, get in my car, head back to Orange County going, what am I going to do? I've just been embarrassed. Maybe I'll become a barber. I'll leave music, have a hairstylist or something, use my GI Bill. But by the time I got to Orange County, I said, no, I want to become a musician. So I went to community college to study music. And that's where I spent a year in music. Then my band director forced me to take other classes. So after 2 years, I had my associate degree and I transferred to Cal State Long Beach, where I now was going to be a music major. But this was 1968. And Governor Reagan came in and forced faculty to teach more classes. And so faculty said, okay, we'll teach more classes. We won't let any more students in our classes. So I was looking around for classes, couldn't get into any classes, music class, sociology. Finally wound up in the anthropology department. And a professor named Carol Swarthout said, well, my class is full, but she saw the look on my face and said, well, maybe I'll let you in. So she let me in. She says, what else are you studying? I said, nothing. I don't have any other classes. So she said, what do you know about evolution? Introduction to biological anthro. So she took me around. I have 15 units in anthropology. I took the 15 units. I realized I can do this. Getting A's and B's. Next semester, I come back and get another 15 units. But I was a musician finishing out my GI Bill. And I finished my BA, but as luck would have it, that spring semester, I took a class. And in that class, the professor showed up late. He slammed his book on his desk, said, if you're not ready to learn, I'm not ready to teach. Left the classroom. I said, hey, I stayed up all night for this class. So I had a friend in the class named Tony Miranda, and Tony Miranda was kind of buffed. He was Filipino Jewish, but he had a mustache like Zapata, so he looked Chicano. And I said, come on, Tony, I want to get my lecture. I didn't stay up all night for this. So I went, we forced, knocked the door, he opened the door, said, yes, I want my lecture. Sat down, we forced him to give us a lecture. We left going, we forced him to lecture. He started calling his faculty going, you're not going to believe this. I just had 2 Chicanos force me to give him a lecture. So we started getting called. I got called by Ted Graves, who had been Robert McCracken's advisor, and he recruited me to UCLA. Tony got recruited to USC. That's how I became a graduate student in anthropology. And when I got there, I said, okay, if I'm going to be a graduate student, I'm going to be a Chicano anthropologist. Well, what does that mean? We begin to see, well, what makes us different as a Chicano anthropologist from the way dominant anthropologists, Euro-American, Anglo-American anthropologists conduct their business? Because if we're doing Chicano anthropology, it cannot be the same kind of anthropology. It has to be different operating propositions. And that's what we came to. And here I have the propositions that we began, that's how I articulate them, the 4 operating propositions of what I call the Chicano-Latino ethnic studies paradigm. First and foremost, we're critical. Critical of dominant individuals, dominant institutions, and dominant ideologies. We are community-centered. We came to the university not to work for the university, but as Jose Vasconcelos said, to insist that the university works for the community. We came to the academy where scholars, dominant scholars in the academy, are concerned only with the academy. At Harvard, they're concerned with Harvard, not with the needy communities. At San Francisco State, we came saying we are here to address the issues, the concerns, the commitments, and the conditions of people among us who are in greater need, and our research needs to address that greater need. We emphasized, when we came to the academy, despite the fact that anthropology was the most holistic of the disciplines, and that's why I appreciate anthropology more than the others, anthropology was increasingly being segmented. Behavioral anthropologists over here, culturalists over here, biologists over there, archaeologists over here, paleontologists over there, applied over here. We came to the university saying we have to be transdisciplinary. If I'm a Chicano scholar, I have to study literature, I have to study whatever the database comes that informs the issue or the problem that I'm concerned with. Multiple methods, multiple models. And finally, we came to university when the university and dominant scholars emphasized the power and the value of being an outsider, particularly in anthropology. I said, I want to be a Chicano scholar. So when I went for my master's degree, I said, I want to go to New Mexico. And they said, no, you have to go to Guatemala. I said, I want to become a Chicano scholar. I said, yes, but you have to have an outsider experience. I said, I don't know anything about New Mexico. I'm from Texas. That wasn't good enough. So I went to Guatemala to do my master's work. When I came back, my faculty wanted to send me to New Zealand to study Maori drinking behaviors, trying to convince me, that'll make you the best anthropologist Chicano possible, go to New Zealand. I said, no, I'm going to study in East LA. Because we have both outsider and insider, and so we begin, what we brought to the academy is the insider's perspective. These are the four operating positions of my paradigms. The problem is when I begin to do this research, how do I apply the critical, the holistic, the community-centered, and the reflexive in the context of these occurinas? Again, just to underscore, we're critical of dominant individuals, dominant institutions, and dominant ideologies. This has been always my concern. So my other research, homeless, addicted, chronically ill, dying, widows, orphans, foster children, prisoners, these are the folks that we need research on. I should put here undocumented as another source. Refugees. And in this context, in Chicano studies, this is my multidimensional model that I incorporate the effect of historical periods, the effect of age stratification, childhood, young adulthood, middle age, senior, the effect of geographical space, geography, the effect of sex, gender, and sexuality, ethnic variety, diversity, and influences. And I underscore this here because, as you know, in terms of dominance, dominants love to use white, but it's very difficult for folks to use red, black, yellow, or brown, because those colors do not seem to be as good as white to be used. So we say white, Latino, white, Asian, white, black. That's the only one we can use, right? So I like to urge us, one takeaway from this, from here, if you use colors, be consistent. If you say white, say brown. We're okay with that. It's a beautiful color. Say white, say red. Beautiful. Yellow. There's a tendency that these other colors are not quite as good and maybe a put down. And so we either have to use that or begin to go here. Indian, African, Asian, but be consistent. Instead of white, use Euro. That's the consistency. So, and that's one of the critiques that I bring to us of the dominant. But how will I adapt this for the ocarinas? Because here now becomes Maya, Aztec, the ethnic variety within the context of Mesoamerica. This becomes Central America. These historical periods can go now millennia. And of course, class is an important factor. The elites versus the working class. So these are the dimensions that I'm trying to keep in mind as I go through this project. This is another model that I have that includes, these are all of the psychological aspects, human systems. If we put Ocarina here in the middle, we see there's a spiritual dimension that involves rituals and beliefs. There's a chronological dimension that involves evolution, chronological changes and continuities over time and space. The chronology of periodization, development of periods, the cosmology, the relationship of these instruments to notions of the origins of the cosmos, the termination of the cosmos. Because within Mesoamerica, there's a sense that the cosmos ends and is regenerated. Unlike some of us, it's a different way. For me, my insider says I grew up as a Catholic, so it's world without end, amen. In Mesoamerica, that is not the ideology of cosmos. The cultural dimensions, the creativity involved in the creation of these instruments, the communication that these instruments are engaged in, because these are instruments for communication at a variety of different levels. Communication with deities, communications with one another, with a variety of aspects. So this is an important one. The ecology, the production and distributions of this, and the relationship of folks to the production and distribution. The creation of classes, technicians, the geographic dimensions, the varieties of clays and microenvironments that affect the way these instruments are created and the way they sound because of the kind of clay involved. The ecology, the technology, techniques involved in making these instruments. The sociology, how are they organized? How is sociology, the social relations that have to do with the creation of these instruments and the stratification, elites, workers, underclass, who has access and creates these instruments and has different relationships to them. The biological aspect of it, these instruments are engaged in related to death and representations of death. And the way to play these instruments has to involve breath, the most essential of the life elements. And then behavior. There's actions and reactions involved in use of these instruments. So this is something, the model that I just keep in mind, that these are all the things that I have to keep in mind as I approach these instruments and begin to fill in the blanks. And then, of course, the subjective outsider and insider. When I came to the academy, this is what they emphasized. We have to be objective outsiders, and you have to pretend that you have no biases. So when they sent me to Guatemala, I had to pretend I had no biases, that I was an outsider, that I was ignorant. And my problem was it was difficult to pretend that I didn't understand or didn't know certain kinds of things. But that's what's required. The objective outsider has only questions. Cannot possibly have insight because you're an outsider. I'm an outsider. When I have insights, then I'm an insider. And I'm subjective. And I'm subjected to biases. If the outsider is unbiased, the insider by definition has to be biased. And we have to expose our biases. And this is what we did in ethnic studies and what we bring that's distinct as that we expose. This is where I'm coming from. And I may articulate my biases, or you may figure them out for yourself, but that's why I'm laying it out. So you can see I am a biased individual. I am a subjective insider. And only when I pretend to be an objective, unbiased outsider, I ask questions. I have no understanding of this. When I have insights. So, in this case, I'm going to play now this. Yes, that's me. cheat, huh? So, I'd like to a quick slide presentation of where I'm coming from. I want to emphasize my mother. I come from a musical family. My mother is a singer, pianist. My dad, trumpet player, drummer. My uncles, musicians. My dad, when he was Knights of Columbus band. It's a Mexican band. It's my tío Pete, the first flute player. Here's my pop as a drummer. Here's my tío Mencho as a clarinetist. They were all influential in my musical development. My tío Johnny taught me to play guitar. Taught me the first 11 notes of Stardust. My tío Silveria made me memorize poem after poem, which led to me by 5 having my own radio program, reciting and singing. Although I went to an elementary school public, it was Dick Diaz, Comanche Boy Scout leader, who taught me how to be an independent learner by learning merit badges. And that was me in learning how to do my indigenous dancing. Me drumming, finally I settled on the clarinet, and marching band like my dad and my uncles. Here I am in Brackenridge Band, the best band in 1948, 4th best band in the world. Marching, I love marching band, but when I graduated, I transformed into the rock and roller, rhythm and blues, joined the band, one of the first integrated bands in San Antonio in 1958, and I focused on the Texas tenor. For a moment I joined the Navy Reserves, thinking I could join the Air Force Navy band. Then when I found out I couldn't, then I joined the Air Force, thought I was going to be in the band, wound up in the dental clinic. So I started hanging out with people, mostly African Americans and musicians in the Air Force. And I joined a number of jazz groups. While during the day I'd take x-rays, at night I'd be playing with different jazz groups in Alabama, in Puerto Rico, and then eventually in Bangor, Maine. Increasingly becoming more Afrocentric in my approach. Occasionally playing drums. Got discharged, I totally went to Las Vegas. Tom Sully from Massachusetts. We joined the band and we became one of the best show bands in Las Vegas. Hanging out with Red Fox, Trini Lopez, the Castro Brothers. We formed another group called the Carousels, an incredible singer. This was my first research project when I joined my undergraduate teacher to Pi Pies to get oral histories. Then this is, once I got to UCLA, went to Guatemala, looked at the relationship of medical behaviors and medical beliefs. I did an insider like me dressing up as a Guatemalan. No one believed that I could do that. Then I went back in '78 and we looked at the effects of the earthquake and the settlements on popular settlements in the city, squatter settlements, and their problems and their issues. That's when I was with Tabasco in '48. We're looking at these settlements and how to address their needs. Needs for pollution. And at the same time, looking at how some folks were so inventive and creative even in the worst of circumstances. After I got my master's, that's my boy Tony, that's the guy. I kept playing with guys, these are Dave and Los Lobos, and I started doing my research on death and dying. I wanted to do it, for my dissertation, I wanted to do a Chicano version of the Justification Mitford, the American way of death. I want to do a Chicano way of death, looking at images of death, the social organization of death, and the use of the mortuary and cemetery, and how death is part of the community. It was this, when I was doing this research, that I got recruited to USC to be part of an aging study that looked at aging in a variety of cultures, 6 different cultures around the country. Just finished a couple of these slides. This was in East LA in the 70s when this transition in the Mexican American community from private Dia de los Muertos, sacred in the home, to public. This becomes a senior project that I begin to look at what are the role of senior citizens clubs, and what are the adaptation problems of seniors to urban environments, particularly senior housing, because in the early 70s, we were not sure that seniors would adapt to segregated housing. People would argue Mexicans aren't going to live segregated, with their families over here and they're living all seniors. So I began to study their adaptation. And to what extent do the images that we have and perceptions that we have of the elders really represent what they are? And to look at what are issues of loneliness and isolation, and how do we understand these issues, and how do we address these concerns in the context of the urban Chicano community. I was doing this research on aging and age stratification in the Chicano community, moved to a multi-ethnic study in San Diego where I compared 10 different groups, 8 different languages, looking at what are benefits that elderly are entitled to that they're not receiving. Native American, Asian American, African American. The Asian was Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, Guamanian, African American, Native American, Latino, and Anglo American. Again, focusing on what are the roles of the seniors, clubs, how they engage in. I do this to maybe a little bit longer than I wanted to do it, but it shows you these are the issues that I was concerned with and the challenge that I have in making a transition to this kind of study. I just want to show you one next slide, which is this is my mom. This is the first time she had danced since my dad had passed. And it was in the senior context that shows what we do. At the same time, I was also observing this, the rise of gangs in East LA. So I began to focus on this project as well. Begin to document both in the US and then eventually on the Mexican side of the border, the resurgence of the Pachuco and the spread of the subculture across the Southwest, with gangs being related just like sister cities, sister barrios. Here I am in El Paso with the police and these kids that were dealing with this issue. The newspaper calling for death to these cholos. So when I went to El Paso, I made a commitment. I said, I'm here to try to make life safer for these kids who dress in this way. Another aspect of it, I looked at the iconography of the tattoos and the significance, their meaning in this context. The writings on the walls. And in addition to the tattoos, then I also began to look at what was called lowriders. The impact of prisons. The identification with a neighborhood, no longer families. And folks that begin to wear their art on their skins. And maybe wonder, who is this? Gangs from the border. We see these images represent females, religious figures, and a car. This is, I began to focus on this because this was conspicuous consumption. And I wanted to understand, look at this investment. These folks invest in these cars. This is the inside, chrome. They don't drive these, they load them on trailers and drive them and then unload them to display them. An incredible aspect of it. And I looked at the formation of car clubs as opposed to gangs. Now here, this next one is just a little inside. This is some of the things that I was focusing on when I went to Templo Mayor. I was very concerned with the workers. As I continue with that project, I want to do the oral history of those workers. I was able to capture some of these images that now are useful to me in understanding the images in the iconography here. So I'm going to stop it there. And show you now, these are the slides that represent the way these instruments were brought to me the first day, April 14th, when I began to work with these. They came to me in these drawers, and pretty much I began just to photograph them as they were, to begin to kind of just get a sense of what am I working with and how am I going to work with these. So the first thing I began to do in terms of analysis was similarities and differences, and begin to sort and think which ones belong together, you know, the Sesame Street. Which ones of these belong together and which ones do not? After that, which one is that? Okay. I begin to sort. And now you can begin to see similarities and differences. And you will see they're all similar. There's certain similarities, but they're no two alike. I want to look at, when we turn them upside down, they're all very similar. But the iconography is so different that of the almost 200 that I photographed and recorded, there were similar, 2 or 3 that were similar, but no two exactly alike. And I think that says something significant and important about this region and these cultures, that they appreciate and seek diversity as opposed to homogeneity, that this is what they like. In the background, you'll hear, this is what I was doing every day in the annex. Each one of these I play note by note, then the scales, and then I would play an improvisation to see how I could feel that instrument. Look at the variety, spindles, so almost 178 instruments were photographed. C119. Then the next stage that's still part of what I'm doing now is the literature. And I just wanted to give you some images. You saw the images, and you'll see the ocarina's up. But this is what was available in the literature. Different images, different perspectives, where we can see and compare what the museum here holds and what holdings are in other museums. And one of the things that impresses me about this, when I went through the literature, is that there's a number of instruments identified as instruments, but that would not normally be thought of as instruments. And I'll show you in just a few minutes. There's these figurines, especially from the Jaina region of Veracruz, that are extraordinary. Most of them are held at Dumbarton Notes. Now here, similar to the ones, but different from the spindles. All of these have some degree of similarity to what we've seen, but different from. So you'll see upstairs a number of instruments that are similar to this. But again, the great variety is what I want to emphasize. Just to give you a sense of, I have recorded 143 of these sessions. 9-4-20/C930. So these are about, I'm just going to show you a little bit so you can see. For each instrument, I read the number, I showed, talked about it.
Sounds like this.
So I play individual, then I go octaves, and then inspiration. The last video I'd like to share with you a little bit of is, this is the demonstration that Lenin Sabino Gonzalez, Peruvian musician, baker, and I think that's important because the person who created the modern ocarina, the Italian Giuseppe Donato, called this the ocarina because he said it reminded him of a little goose. I felt as an outsider to the Mesoamerican experience, I'm North American. And that's the bias that I bring to this. I said, I have to have a balance. If I can't have an insider from Mesoamerica, I'll get an outsider from South America, and maybe he can help me understand something by two outsiders looking at Mesoamerica. Because I knew he understood these instruments from South America. So I brought him in on the project to be my assistant associate and help me understand. And so during the project, I would consult with him. He was the one that said, you know, I think these people not only have dissonance, I think they like dissonance. I think they appreciate dissonance. And that's why we have this dissonance in Central America. Marimbas and other instruments, and he heard it here. And he said, the reason he said, look, I'm from the Andes. We're very precise. He says, I have little pebbles that I could put in my Nesca to make sure I'm in pitch and in tune. He says, doesn't seem to be that kind of concern. So that's one of the hypotheses we're playing with. Hypothetically, we're thinking, is it possible that these folks really appreciated and sought dissonance and diversity as something they appreciated, as opposed to consonance, harmonic convergence, and homogeneity? So, and what we did is, because initially we began to say these are spiritual instruments, spiritual entities, sacred objects, we're going to approach these objects not to try to play them, but to see how they want to be played. And so this is what we did at the presentation that we did for the staff, because I want to do a presentation for the staff because they had helped me bring these instruments to me, so I wanted to do for them. And so we played, and this little show, I'm sure a little inspiration, where we had a conversation. He picked up one instrument that he thought wanted to be played by him. I picked up another, and this is the conversation that we had. Neither one of us knew what the other instrument, and we were just so fortunate that I was able to replicate and answer him. I can't tell what his fingers are doing. I can just hear. Yeah. Oh, good, I followed him. So I'll stop it there.